One of the things about John Paul II, when he had, worked with Poland and the Solidarity movement, and of course it was under communist regime and all of that, and the church had very limited power, and people couldn't practice the freedom to practice the faith as they wanted to, and he had worked about kind of freeing them from that. He does comment later on that as he went back after the fall of communism, how they had used their freedom differently than what was possible, and it was he has like sort of this sad kind of writing about how he had hoped that then they would use their freedom, the very thing that they fought for, to then serve the Lord and become even greater and holier and more saintly, and exercise their faith. But instead, that very same thing of freedom had allowed them to do all kinds of other things. And then they started to look a lot with the abuse of their freedom. Actually the very thing that he would have thought would have turned them toward God actually ended up turning them away from God. And I think that that's so true for a lot of our experiences. The very thing that we could use for good, we end up not for a lot of times. One of the things we say that God has joined himself with humanity, right, in the incarnation. And he says that he will be our God and we will be his people. And as a gift that he gave us the idea of intellect and will, and now we have the freedom to choose, and that's what the greatest gift of love comes from, these things: to know, right, to freely choose, to desire, and then hopefully to choose love. But that very same gift, which gives us the freedom to do that which no other creation has this ability to do, is the very thing that can turn us away, right, and allows us to choose the evil. Right? That was the very same things, whether with intellect and will, with the freedom then to love, is the very same thing that can stray us away from him. Right? That's how difficult, and how we would say really how risky all of this is. That he took that risk. That says these are great gifts for us as human beings to have. But that very gift is the same thing that could destroy us, right? And that we would use to destroy one another. That's kind of the riskiness of this whole test, so to speak, that we've all been. I bring that because, see, the idea that in the gospel here, or first actually in the first reading, which is where I went, where he says, he talks about how God would be our God, we would be his people. And he said, but then in the evil of our hearts, in the hardness of our hearts, we turned our backs on God instead of our faces. We turned our backs against it. The very same thing that would turn us toward God is what we've used to turn us away from God. And then it says, the day your fathers left Egypt, I sent you that way, but then they strayed away. Our challenge, I think, during this Lent is to take a look at the great gift that we've got just in being alive, and then to make sure that all that we have been given would be used for the good, right? Would be used for the very thing that it was designed for, which then to freely respond back in love to God. But the risk is we can freely turn our backs away from God as well. That's the risk of all of this thing we call life.